Everybody, this is Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Hammerhead Show. And with me, as always, my good pal Rob Shue, who is, where are you, Rob? You don't look like you're in Portland today.
I am not. I am still in Atlanta. I am at the Hyatt Regency here, so I hope that the internet connection from Hyatt is suitable for a live stream. Licking my wounds here in Atlanta. Still not ready to admit what happened yesterday, but stuck here one more day. Made a good day of it. Checked out the aquarium around here, making use of time in Atlanta. But it would have been better celebrating a win.
Yeah, definitely would have been a lot more fun if the 49ers had actually pulled it off. And then real quick, before we get started, just have a bunch of folks over in the comment section already. We have Deborah Maxwell, who says Kyle needs to put Purdy in, test waters. It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. Rookie with skills, a veteran. Okay. Good draft choices. Okay, Kyle, use him. You're not wrong. Okay, well, I'm not sure about Purdy, but we'll get into that one. We got Raphael 5629ers. Member of the Toolbox is what's up, Jack, Rob, members of the Toolbox, and everyone. Good to have you on board. We have Savory Movie, who doesn't disagree with Deborah. We got Gold Blooded, who's a Jimmy fan and says Jimmy and Ayuk were the two best players on the offense yesterday. We've also got Alan, who I believe is a member of your channel. He says, Jack and Rob, good morning. Evening to both of you. Good to have you on board, Ellen. Moonman says, Jack, lots to talk about. 14 points on offense. Shake my head for sure. And then last but not least, Gold Blood again says, hola, Jack and Rob. Rob, man, you're banned, my man. You can come to the Chargers game and break the jinx. They won't lose when I'm there, and you can carry the W for the break.
I may need that. Yeah, I know there are shots coming across my bow after another loss this season in attendance. I take zero personal responsibility. That's where I'm at with this, Jack.
Yeah, and then we got Justin says, Rob, stop traveling with the team. I told Rob this. I told Rob before we went on that I wasn't going to give him too much heck, but I'll just say it here because I've got 21 people in the show right now. I had told Rob after we got off our show on his channel on Friday that if the 49ers lost this game, I was going to go at him on Twitter and say that he is basically to the 49ers what that little tiki idol in Hawaii was to Greg Brady. For the older folks in the crowd, you might remember what happened with that tiki idol and Greg Brady. But, hey, it is what it is. It was a rough game for the 49ers. And I guess I'll ask you, did that game go much differently than you expected?
Yes, significantly. I mean, in many ways, I expected it to be a more difficult game than 49er faithful were predicting. I did not expect this to be a game that we walked away with. However, I did hope for the 49ers to come out and really put a physical stamp on this game, to even if they lost it, to be able to say, we came out and we really punched them in the mouth. And quite the opposite happened. It felt as though Atlanta had that mindset. Atlanta came out and punched San Francisco in the mouth, and we didn't seem to have an answer for it. And it was that way from the outset. I mean, the fans to begin the game for Atlanta were not wildly optimistic. It reminded me of Denver in that regard. You were in the stands. The fans had this attitude of like, we're not expecting to win today, and we're just hoping for a good contest. As soon as Atlanta came out and began to push San Francisco around, the attitude in the stadium changed. And you could tell people realized that the Falcons had a real shot at winning that game.
Yeah, well, for me, I'm going to take off what KW2421 says right here. The defense looked soft, and I was worried about this one coming in. I was, unlike a lot of people, I was a little bit nervous about not having Nick Bosa because I know Bosa is a really good pass rusher, but he's also one of their better run defenders as well. So I was a little bit nervous about that. And I felt like the 49ers defense in particular just got worked along the defensive line throughout the whole game. And that was, I think, really the story of what happened was the way that the 49ers defense front got manhandled really allowed Atlanta just to do what they always do.
Yeah, it did feel as though the 49ers could have had a counterpunch to that if they had been able to sustain long drives. Had they been able to punch the ball into the end zone, perhaps their defense would have been able to make a stop here or there. But when you're unable to answer on offense and you're making your own mistakes and you're just not going to get that run game going, you allow the other team to get to 40 carries. That is problematic. It did feel as though Atlanta was able to do to us what we set out to do to them.
Yes, pretty much. That's the case. What Atlanta did was they did to the 49ers what the 49ers did to everybody last year. Not so much this year, but last year in particular when they went on a run. Let's get into some of the overreactions real quick because I think they go along pretty well with what took place in that game. And one of the ones that this is what I titled the show is Kyle Shanahan should be on the hot seat. What do you think?
I'm not ready to go there yet. I have been a fairly staunch Kyle Shanahan supporter. And what I will say is that slowly but surely, I am changing that tune to where I no longer believe it is crazy to talk about replacing Kyle Shanahan. I still believe that you want to have a pretty good name on the tip of your tongue before you're talking about moving on from Kyle Shanahan. But regardless of what I feel in his ability to draw up very effective offenses, regardless of how I may feel in his ability as a play caller when he does get into a rhythm, I do feel that he has shortcomings and one might say fairly significant shortcomings when it comes to being a head coach. I still remain in the camp where I'd rather he figure those things out while he's with San Francisco because of everything else that he brings with him. If he does figure out those last few pieces that seem to be missing as a head coach, I have no doubt in my mind that he will become someone like an Andy Reid who catches on fire later in his career, someone like a Bill Belichick who goes on from Cleveland to then really knock it out of the park with New England. I'm not trying to immediately crown Kyle Shanahan with those coaches, but I see the special elements for him. I'm not ready to give up on it, but I have to admit, if this season goes poorly, I think Kyle Shanahan is legitimately on the hot seat next season.
Yes, and I agree with that. That's kind of where I am. I don't think that he's on the hot seat right now. I do think that if this season trends in a really negative direction, I think he ends up on the hot seat going into next year. I think that the heat will be the seat will be warm for him going into 2023. I just don't see them moving off of Kyle Shanahan until he has at least one season with Trey Lance. And I look at it also from this standpoint is I look at the game yesterday and I don't blame Kyle Shanahan's play calling for the reason why they're failing. I see it more to do with the personnel that they're utilizing on the offensive side of the ball. When you're taking those deep shots, you look at the way the game played out. You have a deep shot from in the second half. You've got
Right.
the deep shot from Jimmy Garoppolo down the middle in 2 times. But why are you using Ray McLeod, a journeyman, for the deep post when you have Brandon Ayuk and you have Deebo Samuel, you have Danny Gray standing on the sidelines in his street clothes? Why are you using Charlie Warner down the middle on that post instead of Ross Dwelly, who was dressed yesterday and playing only on special teams? I understand, how about we use the guys who actually can catch the ball to throw the ball to him, because Ross Dwelly has the best hands among the tight ends on this roster. Get him on the field and have him run that route, not Charlie Warner. The same thing with Warner did the same thing, not quite as bad, but he did that already a couple of weeks ago. I think it was against the Rams. I don't know where we're going with this. And so when I look at Kyle Shanahan and we start to talk about being on the hot seat or his issues, I take this to, I don't have an issue with him when it comes to play calling, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But for me, when it comes to Kyle Shanahan, it is the personnel. It is the fact that his offense continues to make the same little mistakes week after week after week. And I think that's where he falls on the sword.
Yeah, and you do see an offense that continues to shoot themselves in the foot, one that can't seem to make the plays when they need to be made. And to your point, you can't fault Kyle Shanahan for not making those catches. You can't fault Jimmy Garoppolo for not making those catches in the game yesterday. There were a couple of drops that felt like they could have at least kept this game close. But I do think it's fair what you point out in who you schemed to be on the field at that moment. Why not have your best players there? And is that just a little bit too cute to have one of those other receivers or tight ends out there in those cases? And there does seem to be a trend with Kyle Shanahan as far as getting cute in high pressure moments, or a stubbornness that refuses to admit perhaps we need to try things a little bit differently going forward. And for a long time, I thought that stubbornness was not misplaced. It felt as though Kyle Shanahan, it just needed to wait for things to click. And it feels like we've been waiting a long time for things to click. This offense has not gotten to a point that it should when you have a coach of Kyle Shanahan's caliber. So something is amiss. And whether it is a failure to bring aboard a true offensive coordinator to take some of the pressure off of Kyle Shanahan, whatever the solution is, by this point in his tenure with the 49ers, he should have figured it out.
Yeah, it's just, and here's the wild thing with where they are right now. The 49ers are actually ahead of pace from last season, right? They're 3-3 instead of 2-4, so they're a little bit better there.
Sitting in first in the NFC West.
Yeah, that's don't forget that part, right? They're sitting in first place in the NFC West. When it comes to points scored, they're only 13 points off of where they were at this point last year. If you remember the beginning of last season, they weren't scoring very much. They had a big outburst against Detroit, and then they had a pretty good game against Green Bay, kind of in a comeback fashion. They didn't score very much in the beginning of the game, but they scored a bunch after that in the second half to get back into it and take the lead at the end. But it's just, they were other than that, they were really kind of struggling and scuffling along. And we're seeing that a little bit now as well. Let's jump off of this just because there was a question over in the comment section by Gold-Blooded, and it kind of goes along with our next one. So Shanahan on the hot seat. And this goes directly back to the game, though, from yesterday. And it says Shanahan has no sense of urgency. That's what it should say. Shouldn't say not. It should say no sense of urgency. And that's really going to that series in the fourth quarter, down by 14 points. Take the ball over at your own 1 yard line. There's about 10:45 left to play in the game, and you take 8 minutes off of the clock. What are your thoughts around that possession for the 49ers?
I feel as though it's a calculated decision by Shanahan. It's easy to criticize and say, listen, you want to maximize the number of offensive plays that you can run with that much time left. The more offensive plays that you have a chance to run, the greater your opportunity is at a comeback. However, I will say that you can also take the more conservative approach and say to yourself, all right, my defense has been getting gashed to this point. And if I score quickly and then turn it right back over to them, my defense is not going to be able to stop Atlanta one more time. Instead, you say, listen, we're down 2 scores. There are 10 minutes remaining. If I possess the ball on a reasonable drive to start, I then have a chance to give my defense a little bit of rest, allow them a 3 and out. I still have all 3 timeouts remaining. That gives me enough time for a 2-minute drive. It puts all of your eggs in one basket. The reason for taking shots down the field, getting super aggressive, and attempting to score quickly is to maximize the number of opportunities you have, the number of bites you have at the apple. Shanahan's decision-making shrunk that to where there was no opportunity for failure. You then had to score on that first possession, needed to stop Atlanta on the ensuing possession, and then also score to tie the game up with your last possession. So it took the margin of error out of it. I'm not sure that I can fully fault that. I will say I was growing frustrated in the stands watching the 49ers fail to hurry to the line and eating up a significant amount of time.
Yeah, no, I've heard this one quite a bit, and I'm going to disagree with the lack of a sense of urgency from the 49ers in the standpoint that they got the ball at their own 1. They were at their 23-yard line with 7:28 to go, right around there. And Jimmy Garoppolo hits. They take the deep shot. that everybody's talking about. And Jimmy Garoppolo hits Brandon Ayuk for 37. He flips the field from the 23 to the 40 of Atlanta. But the play doesn't hold because you have what I just said, a hold on Jake Brendel. So instead of having first and 10 at the Atlanta 40 with 7 minutes and 20 seconds left to play, because of the hold on Brendel, you're now pushed back to the 13-yard line. And that was the second penalty of that series by Brendel. He also got called for a illegal man downfield on a completion to George Kittle that wiped out 5 yards. I kind of did the numbers on that drive. The 49ers put up 143 yards on that drive. That's including the yards that were wiped out due to penalties. And they come away with no points, mainly because Jake Brendel got called for an illegal man downfield. He got called for a hold, and he got called for an illegal snap. Even when you take out the plays that were lost due to the 43 yards on the pass and the two passes that were wiped out, they still put up 100 yards on that drive, and they ended up at the 18 or 19-yard line, whatever it was. So I don't think that it's a Kyle Shanahan issue. Again, this goes back to it's a Kyle Shanahan issue in terms of execution from his players,
right?
But it's not a Kyle Shanahan issue when it comes to the play calling. We've seen him do this over and over again. If they get the ball to the 40, they probably can score relatively quickly from there, because that's usually what they do when they're, when they start moving the ball. That's
right.
If they get on the board right there with 6 minutes left, let's say it's 5, I would feel okay about their chances to get the ball back one more time.
Absolutely.
They did anyway, and they did anyway, right? They did get the ball back one more time. The problem is they just didn't score any points on the long possession. But if they'd scored with 5 or 6 minutes to go, if that drive finishes off, if you don't have Jake Brendel forcing, penalties all over the place, that whole thing might end up a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely could. And again, I mean, I understand the criticism because you are down 2 scores and it doesn't look as if there is a sense of urgency there. Then you get the way in which the game turns out, and it just becomes a picture perfect scenario to criticize Kyle Shanahan. But again, to the way in which you just laid it out there, and to my point, if you do score on those drives, the way in which he was pursuing that time of possession, the closing out of the game, could have worked had they simply executed. It was that failure to execute that ended up killing the 49ers in this game. I suppose that's the frustrating part for me, Jack, though, is wondering if you have a coach who is an offensive, at least if we don't want to call him an offensive genius, because I get there are people who don't want to give him that moniker after what we're seeing right now. Even if you're not willing to give him the offensive genius label, he's clearly a great offensive mind within the league. Other people are copying his offense. Clearly, when he's in rhythm, a great play caller. But if he's continuing to bump his head up against these issues, what is it that's going to allow Kyle Shanahan to become a more effective head coach? Where will he be able to get his teams to take that next step in execution?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the execution piece, it's interesting. I don't really know how he does it, other than, there's some guys who they lean on. Again, when you're in a position where you're trying to come back, why are you using your 4th best wide receiver to be the guy you're taking a deep shot to? Why are you using your 3rd best receiving tight end to be the guy you're taking the deep shots to? I think for me, when you're looking at it, when you look at the end of last season, partly why they were so successful was because they were consistently getting the ball in the best player on their team's hands. And that was Deebo Samuel, whether it was as a running back or as a wide receiver. They were getting him consistently to make big plays, and they're not getting that right now. And because I don't think they're giving him the ball. I mean, yesterday he got a lot of targets, but a lot of those also were on the shorter end and that kind of stuff.
And it is fair to point out that in critical moments in that NFC Championship game, there was the attempt to get it to Travis Benjamin in that moment, right? Like there are those times where Kyle Shanahan will attempt to get the ball to someone that's less than ideal for a high pressure moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I was looking, there was somebody over here in the comment section who made a really good point about the run game, and I'm trying to find it. I don't see it right now. but it's very important. I think that's one of the other pieces too. You know, I'll just bring it up as a comment over here as this. You know, does the 49ers offense even have an identity right now to you? Do you believe that this 49ers offense has any kind of an identity?
I believe that they have an identity they want. They have an identity that they're after. I'm not certain that they've been able to achieve that identity on offense. Clearly on defense, they have an identity, and it just wasn't reflected in this most recent game because of the injuries. Injuries caught up to them. That's one thing. But this offense has been searching for an identity since the start of the season. And true, it had to completely abandon whatever that initial plan was because of the change from Trey to Jimmy Garoppolo. But now Jimmy is back, and Jimmy has been with this team before. It shouldn't be hard to slide back into an identity that allows for a physical nature, establish the run, be efficient, essentially do what Atlanta did to us, to opposing teams, and be able to run the ball 30, 35, 40 times. As of right now, there doesn't seem to be the will for the 49ers, nor is there necessarily the skill to get it done at this point in time. I mean, I've seen flashes from Jeff Wilson Jr., but I'm concerned about the depth of the running back room until we get Elijah Mitchell back, or until TDP shows that he can break off some runs.
Yeah, I'm here with you. You know, I look at this game when we look at talk about the offensive identity. My answer to this question or this comment is I agree with this. This offense right now has no identity. They think they have an identity. People that are, you know, analysts and ourselves and everybody else, and if you ask Kyle Shanahan and his coaching staff, I think they would tell you that they have an identity, that they want to run the ball, they want to do these things. Here's the difference. Atlanta, the Falcons, they have an identity because you know going into that game exactly what they're going to do to you. And they do it regardless of what's going on. I saw, you know, like KW2421 says here, why did we abandon the run? Yeah, we're down, but the longer drives go, the less time Mariota has to slice up our defense and all that kind of stuff. That's one of the reasons why it plays out so well for Atlanta. I look at the game yesterday, and the 49ers are down 14-0 to start the game after the fumble. You know, 2 possessions into the game, they're down 14-0. From that point on, they ran the ball that was about halfway through the first quarter. About halfway through the first quarter, through the end of the game, they ran the ball 12 times the rest of the game. 12 times, 12 runs, 39 passes from that point on. That doesn't seem like a team that has any kind of identity to me, especially when you flip that, like I said, how Atlanta has an identity. The Falcons, just take what they did the week before. They were down 21-0 in the fourth quarter to Tampa Bay. In the fourth quarter against the Buccaneers, the Falcons ran the ball 16 times, down 21-0. They stuck with who they are and what they do, and that's freaking good coaching. That is a coach who has instilled in his players what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And for, you know, obviously the 49ers shot themselves in the foot and all those kind of things. But I think Atlanta sticking to their identity took the 49ers out of their game plan. And you saw the team that knows who they are beat the team who doesn't.
Yeah, because there was absolutely a chance for San Francisco to regain their footing and reapply that strategy when they got the game back to nil, right? When they got back to a square score at that point, 14 all, and they couldn't, or were unwilling to, or uncommitted to. Atlanta, on the other hand, absolutely felt like they were committed to that process. They were going to out-physical the 49ers from start to finish. They came in attempting to run. The 49ers knew they were going to run, and it didn't stop them, right? There are times where the Niners have had that identity. There are times in the Shanahan era where we have had that identity. It doesn't seem to be the case so far this year. And I get a sense that it's a bit of an unknown as to what this team wants to be. At the core of it, I would assume that Shanahan wants to be a run-heavy team. when you look at Jimmy Garoppolo and him talking about, hey, yeah, it's kind of nice to have been able to throw the ball down the field a little bit more. It feels like they're still very much working out what this offense should be. And I'm sure some of that has to do with the fact that they were planning to operate with Trey Lance behind center. But again, they've had enough games with Jimmy Garoppolo that it should be apparent what they can and cannot do. And Kyle Shanahan should have a vision for what he wants to do at this point.
Yeah. And, you just mentioned how the 49ers were able to get back into this game and it was 14-14 and those types of things. So I'm going to now bring up the next of the questions because these things all kind of roll together. And that is the 49ers defense has a weakness. That is a overreaction or not, but I believe that there is a little bit of a weakness. And I don't think it's just a defensive weakness. I think it rolls over to what happens on offense as well, because when teams run the ball really well, like we saw with Atlanta, it puts your offense in a tough bind because you're not going to get the ball as much. If it hadn't been for that 10-minute drive that the 49ers didn't score on, they would have got blown out in time of possession yesterday. But I think when you look back at this 49ers defense, there were a lot of people talking about how good this group was after they blew out Carolina, how they could win without Nick Bosa, how they were fine with what they had. I know that I was one of them in terms of talking about the depth, and I still believe that that's the case. I do believe that the 49ers defense that they put on the field yesterday was talented enough to win the game. But one thing that we found now in all three 49ers losses have a similar theme to them. The first one, turnovers. 49ers turned the ball over more, 3 times, 3-0 in 2 of their losses, and the other one I think it was 2-1. So they've lost the turnover battle in all 3 of their games. The other thing that the 49ers have done in all 3 of their losses is that their defense has allowed the opponents to run the ball 30 or more times, 31 times by the Broncos, 37 by the Bears, and then 40 yesterday. And so some of that's on the defense and some of that is on the offense. But I thought yesterday they just got worked up front because it didn't matter whether it was Caleb Huntley or Tyler Algier or even Marcus Mariota, there was room to run. They were getting to the line of scrimmage and beyond before being contacted repeatedly.
Yeah, honestly, if there was one area I was concerned about with this defense, it certainly was the ability to stop the run. And as you watch the injuries mounting along the defensive line, it becomes that much harder to stop the run when you're down Javon Kinlaw, Eric Armstead, Azeez Al-Shire. You certainly don't have the same horses in the stable to attempt to minimize the damage done by the run. But even coming into it with the entire roster healthy, that was the one area of this defense that I wondered if it would be the weakness. I still think this is a top unit in the league, predicted it to be a top 3 unit. And I also was one of those people, espousing just how amazing this defense was coming off of Carolina, talking about how this defensive line, even with Bosa out, might be a top 10 starting defensive line with all the backups in there. They weren't able to hold their own in this one against Atlanta. And whether that had to do with mounting snaps in weeks prior and then having a week wherein you're staying on the East Coast after a short week, you've traveled across the country, whatever played into it, the defense did not look like the same defense this past weekend. And I will say that the offense still could have helped that. I think you're right on in saying that in order to have a very successful run-stopping defense, you've got to be able to rest those defensive linemen. You have to be able to possess the ball while you're on offense and maintain your side of that time of possession. If the 49ers can't get, 4 yards per carry or greater from the running backs, they're going to have a hard time doing that. And if they don't have that complementary football of the run game and efficiency when it comes down to third down passing, then they're just going to give the ball back to the opposing team. And eventually their own defensive line will get worn out. I see this roster as capable of playing amazing complementary football, even when injured. I think what did them in on Sunday was that inability to possess the ball on offense, just continuing to put the defense back out there, even after it was apparent that they were gassed and the defense just had no answers.
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree because, and you're not the first person that I've heard say that. I'm gonna disagree, and here's where I'll disagree.
Yeah.
Let's just go through let's go through what happened prior to the 3 touchdown drives that Atlanta went on.
Yeah.
They opened the game with a touchdown drive.
Right.
The 49ers tied the game up at 14. Long touchdown drives on, there was a possession. They had the ball for a pretty good amount of time. It's now 14-14. Long touchdown drive to take the lead right before the half. You go into the halftime, 49ers missed their deep shot. They punt. Long Falcons drive to go up to 28-14. So the 3 touchdown drives that Atlanta went on yesterday weren't after 3 and outs. They weren't after short offensive possessions. That was after the defense was able to rest a little bit. So that's the piece that's worrisome about that is I was kind of thinking about this morning, and in some ways, that felt very similar to what we saw in 2020. Remember in 2020, everybody kept talking about what a great job Robert Saleh was doing with that defensive unit. There would be times where the 49ers offense would finally get themselves together, they get themselves back into the game, and it's like, okay, we need to get a stop. Get a stop right here. We've got momentum. We got to get a stop. And they give up a touchdown. And that's what we saw yesterday. And that's why I think Kyle Shanahan, I've been pretty hard on Kyle Shanahan. You've been kind of hard on him here today too. One of the things that I've heard people say is that he was wrong to talk about the 3rd and 12 conversion by Marcus Mariota, that wasn't really the biggest play of the game. But in a lot of ways, it really was, from the standpoint that you had all the momentum at that point. You've got them back inside their own 30, 3rd and 12. This is where your defense should be able to get a stop. And instead, you get a 15-yard run by the quarterback. And not only do you give up a 15-yard run, but then your defense after that mistake just kind of collapses on itself and allows, that drive to continue. You get the 20-yard completion. You get then you get a stop, make it 2nd and 11 down in close to the red zone or inside the red zone. And you get a toss sweep around the right side that gets them all the way down to the 3. And then Marcus Mariota does what he does on his own read and takes it in. That's one of the issues that I have with this defense is when things start to go, they have a tendency at times for things to kind of snowball on them. Mm-hmm. Go back to the 2021 NFC Championship game. You get the dropped interception by Jaquiski Tartt, and then what happens from there? Things just snowball, and boom, points.
I wonder, I see a similar circumstance for this entire team. I feel like what they talk about in the replacements where Shane Falco, great role by Keanu Reeves, is talking about quicksand. And I have felt that throughout the Shanahan era. And I'm a firm believer that it's a top-down type of an issue, that Coach Shanahan, when it comes to high-pressure moments, has had a history of not coming through in those, in making poor decisions, in compounding poor decisions, and in allowing a game to go from, okay, we should have this in the bag, to, oh, this might be in question, to, oh, shit, we're going to lose this game. Like, it can happen so quickly, and it feels like it's something that Kyle Shanahan mentally allows on some level, and it trickles down to his players. I absolutely see it within Jimmy Garoppolo, and so it wouldn't surprise me to see it reflected within Robert Saleh, to see it reflected within DeMeco Ryans and the decisions they may make as well. I have to go back to looking at Kyle Shanahan when I see that one aspect, because it seems to begin with him.
Yeah, and I know as the head coach, it always comes back to you. So when your team's losing, I'm going to just kind of, hopefully my youngest son's Pop Warner coach isn't watching this, because otherwise he's going to get in trouble. So I was watching them at their, I was watching their game 2 weeks ago. They're up by 13 points. This team that they're playing is so, but really only has one play that's good, and it's the quarterback running around the left side on kind of where they fake the ball to the right, and he's bootlegging around the left side. They scored their first touchdown on a long run like that. They score again. Our team is up by, like I said, 14, I think it was, whatever it was. They're up by 2 scores. They get the ball. They score in that manner with that play. They get the ball on after an onside kick. They do it again, and they do it again, and they win the game. They end up losing. My son's team ends up losing the game. And I'm standing by the fence, and I'm hearing the coach complain about the way that the players played. And I was so angry, but I just don't say anything because I don't want to be that dad. But I'm so angry because I'm like, it wasn't the kids' fault that they weren't able to do it. It's your fault because you didn't get them in the right places. Your job as a coach. I understand it's just Pop Warner, but your job as the coach is to prepare the kids to make the plays and to be able to see the game and adjust and help them out. I think I was the only person on our side of the field that knew what the play was going to be because I was screaming it out before the play started. And then my girlfriend basically told me to shut up, and I did. But
that's good. That's good. That's good to listen to that advice.
Yeah, and I think that's partly where we are with this team is you've got a team that has I think they have a lot of talent, but for whatever reason there is just something that's missing, and I think it comes from the top down.
I definitely agree that it comes from the top down. There's no question in my mind, and it's one reason that I love Kyle Shanahan for his ability to find and develop new coaches. And when he brought in Anthony Lynn, the outside hire gave me a sense of optimism that none of the inside hires did, because it felt like he was bringing in someone that could stand up to him, that would be a voice of reason in any of those high pressure situations. And I still believe that Shanahan can turn it around. I am not ready to give up on him as a head coach yet. And I'm no longer at a point where I'm going to defend him tooth and nail.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one. The Gold Rush 561, he has a good super chat that I want to pull up. He says Atlanta punted 3 straight possessions in the 4th quarter. Where was he? He did its job. I'm not trying to say that the defense didn't play well, but I'm saying is that the defense has some holes, and the defense yesterday had a role in the game. Could the offense have done better? Yes. But at the same time, part of the outcome of the game was because the Atlanta offense dominated the game. They really did. Atlanta had only 1 3-and-out the entire way. They in the second half, although they punted 3 times, they had a drive at the end of the 3rd quarter. It was 6 plays. That's it. They only went 18 yards, but they took 4 minutes off the clock because they were just running the ball and they were keeping it in bounds. Same thing on the second possession. So when you go through that, the first punt, just go ahead and go through it for you. The first punt ends up with the Jimmy Garoppolo interception. The second punt ends up with an 80-yard drive that we already detailed. And then the last punt comes at the end of the game. Now, here's the other thing that's kind of, when you look at things like this, do we think that the Falcons are necessarily going to go punting the ball as often as they did at the end of the game if they're not up by 14? You know what I'm saying?
That's a fair question. To me, this one came down as a complete team loss. I am in no way excusing the defense. The one excuse that I think you cannot, put out there, you can't fail to put out there, is the injuries for the defense, certainly. And I would argue that there were times where the defense came through. But when you look at the totality of the game, I have to look at the defense and say, hey, you knew what Atlanta was coming out to do. You knew they were going to attempt to run all over us, and we were unable to stop that. So that, to me, has to be viewed as a failing by the defense. Now, if I'm attributing blame to the team, am I giving a larger share of it to the offense? Yes, absolutely. The offense did not have the same number of excuses to rely on, did not have the same number of injuries to overcome, and continued to make plays that just a simple catch here or there might have been the difference in at least keeping this game close.
Yeah. And here's the thing: like, did the defense do its job? Again, they were okay. But again, they gave up 3 drives of over 70 yards for touchdowns. Well, excuse me, a 74-yard, a 75, and the third one wasn't 60. It was 65, not over 70. I apologize, but they dominated. They were beaten down, and I understand the injuries, and you can give them all kinds of excuses. The one last thing, because we're giving the defense the injury excuse.
Yeah. It is fair to point out something for the offense.
Yeah. What about the fact that the offense was playing without either of its starting tackles?
I suppose that's something to be mentioned.
And maybe the fact that the offense didn't have Elijah Mitchell, which they haven't had him all year other than the first game. But, when you're playing without your starting tackles, that changes things just a little bit, maybe. I don't know. The one thing that I will say, and somebody put it up over here, and we already kind of hit on why was Danny Gray why is he standing on the sidelines in street clothes? Where is Jordan Mason? Why is Jordan Mason on this team? I mean, I know he's playing special teams, but
I did see him right out there on the field, right in front of me. I was like, that's Jordan Mason right there. He's not going to get the ball, but that's Jordan Mason.
How was Tevin Coleman getting 4 carries and none go to Jordan Mason? How is Jordan Mason getting 0 snaps on offense? It makes no sense. I'm at loss for words. I can't even spit it out.
It's frustrating because you know what you have in Tevin Coleman. And I will say, someone put it in the chat earlier, people were talking about how good Tevin Coleman looked after the last game. And Tevin Coleman did add something to this offense. He absolutely provided something that was missing, and his ability to catch passes is a skill set. That being said, you look at what he brings to the table, and it's very clear the skill set Tevin Coleman has. It's not going to be an enormous burst, an undiscovered gem, whereas there's a chance with Jordan Mason that that's the case. And it is frustrating to feel it's languishing on the sideline when you don't have a better option that's out there lighting the world on fire. If Jeff Wilson Jr. was continuing to tear it up, then you wouldn't be calling for opportunities for others. If Tevin Coleman continued to have the game that he had against Carolina, again, you would say, hey, it's warranted that he's out there getting the touches. But when the offense is struggling, when you cannot get the run game going, and it would appear you have someone who can generate a spark of some type sitting on the sideline in uniform, why not get him a few touches?
Absolutely. And the Gold Rush comes back in with another super chat. It's hard to blame the D. It's been the backbone of the team all year. Consistent offensive execution is missing from the team, and it starts with Kyle Shanahan. Absolutely. We talked about that already, the Gold Rush. I know it says on here the defense has a weakness. We're not saying that the defense was to blame. I agree with you, Rob. I think this was it wasn't just one side of the ball. We always have that argument, or we always have that these discussions of it was this. We have to have somebody. There has to be this one individual person or individual entity that we're going to blame for the loss. It wasn't that way. The offense struggled. They fumbled the ball. The offense did what they've been doing all year. And that's the one thing I want to say really quick. If there's anybody in the comment section who is talking about wants to bring up the game against Carolina, yes. not Jeff Wilson Jr., Tevin Coleman looked good against the Carolina Panthers. Absolutely. He had a really nice reception down the left sideline, had a couple of nice runs, decent runs, but he still only had about 2.5 yards per carry when it was all told in that game. We talked on Friday, and I told you this, Rob. They were playing against a Carolina Panther defense that was playing without its 2 starting safeties and its best middle linebacker, who was their leading tackler. So that was one of the questions that I'd asked you before the game when we were talking on Friday was, can this team beat a defense that actually is healthy? I had a lot of questions about it, and we're right now, the offense is, we know who the offense is. The offense is going to shoot itself in the foot. They're going to drop the ball. They're going to have penalties. They're going to give you about 17 points a game unless you give them the ball deep in the other end. Otherwise, it's going to be a long day.
And that is absolutely brutal. I mean, it's terrifying to think of wasting a defensive performance, not because you don't have the horses on offense, not because you don't have the players, but because you can't seem to put those players into the best position to be successful on a consistent basis. And, oh, by the way, you are an offensive-minded coach. It makes it that much more difficult to swallow the pill. And again, I'm not saying that to put Kyle Shanahan on the hot seat. I am not one of those people that wants to just burn this thing down. I just am extremely frustrated in the inability for this coaching staff to seem to put it all together when it feels as though the talent is there, when it feels as though the offensive mind is there, the talent is there, the defensive mind is there. Like, what is missing at this point? It doesn't seem like anything is missing save for this injury bug that we continue to fight, which I'm thankful doesn't appear to be a whole bunch of season-ending injuries at this point. I still think this squad is healthy enough to make the run that I predicted them to make, but all of that is for naught if Kyle Shanahan cannot find a rhythm on offense and can't get this offense to perform on a consistent basis and start putting up more consistent points.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to wrap this thing up in a minute, but we have one more topic that I want to hit on that I think is going to be a lot of fun for everybody. And they're going to, I don't know if you even know what this one is yet, but Gold Blood, that's a really good question. I don't know about if Danny Gray is a problem attitude-wise. I understand what you're talking about in the Denver game. Not sure on that. That's actually a question that I should be asking this week. All right, here we go. The last one. The last overreaction that somebody sent to me today. If Jim Harbaugh had this roster, the 49ers would dominate. Is this a overreaction or not?
Jack, this is a tough one. Is it an overreaction? No, I don't think it is. I feel horrible saying that, but if there was one thing that Jim Harbaugh was phenomenal at, and I'm not saying that there was only one thing Jim Harbaugh was phenomenal at, but it was preparing his players to go out and play, getting them fired up to go out for a physical matchup, getting them stoked to go kick someone's ass. That felt like Harbaugh's wheelhouse, you know, the banging on the chest plate of Kaepernick or Alex Smith, slapping him upside the head. All of that was the rah stuff. All of that was the, hey, get hyped enough to run through that brick wall over there. And his practices felt very much the same way. Everything felt geared towards, we're going to play harder than the opposing teams, and we're going to impose our will upon them. I have very little doubt that if this team set out to impose their will upon other squads around the NFL, that we would be able to beat most of the squads around the NFL, because I look at this roster and I see that much talent.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I kind of go back and forth because let's focus on Jim Harbaugh's first 3 years before we get to the fourth one. Because in year 4, that's the year they had injuries and that's the year they fell apart. But that's also the year that he was at war with Jed York, I think, for most of the season. So I think at the end of the season, things started to fall apart for him. There was a lot of stuff that was going on in that building. But I would say the answer to this is that if Jim Harbaugh had this roster, the 49ers would dominate. I would say that's not an overreaction. I would say that's accurate. And I would point to a game between the 49ers and the Falcons as my justification why. Here's the difference between Kyle Shanahan and Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh had an identity that he stuck with all the time. You knew exactly what you were going to get from Jim Harbaugh's teams when he was a member of the head coach of the 49ers. You knew that they were going to run the ball, and they were going to keep doing it, and they were going to keep doing it, and they were going to keep doing it. You go to the NFC Championship game in 2012, 2013 in Atlanta. The 49ers fell behind 17-0 on the first play of the second quarter. They were down 17-0. The 49ers, after that point, ran the ball down the Falcons' throats to the point where the only 2 touchdowns in the second half, when they finished that comeback off, were runs by Frank Gore for touchdowns. They ran the ball more than they threw it. And that was after being down 17-0. So don't tell me that when you're down 14-0 halfway through the first quarter, Kyle Shanahan, that you can't keep running the ball. You can. You just don't have an identity, and it's costing your team games.
That stings, Jack. That stings because it feels very true in this instance. When we got back to even in this game, it felt as if it was a fresh start, a time to just say, all right, get back to what it is we set out to do. But it wasn't. It was Atlanta continuing to imprint themselves on this game. And so long as the 49ers are unable to assert themselves in that way on opponents, to exude that offensive identity, to find and then exude that offensive identity, I think as we get closer to the playoffs, it's going to be that much harder for this team to win. I don't have a doubt that we could squeak our way into winning the NFC West. Even with this odd start to the season, I think it's going to shake out very close at the end of the year. I believe in our ability to match up with our opponents within the NFC West. But I'll tell you what, if we don't find an offensive identity, if we do not heal up from this wide variety of injuries that we're currently suffering from, I don't have a whole lot of faith in this team's ability to win those tough matchups, those close matchups, those playoff games on the road when it gets physical. They have, let me be clear in saying, they have the talent to win those games, but right now they don't look like the type of team that would win those games.
I agree. And real quick, I'm going to bring up the super chat from Lester San Jose. Thank you very much. He's a member of the Toolbox as well. Thank you for that. He says, good to see you two collabing. As far as Harbaugh, this was before the CBA prevented extra work being done to get them to that point. There was, they weren't able, there might've been some things that they were able to do that they're not able to do now. But in terms of the practices, they still only had one practice that wasn't 2-a-days. So it was very similar. It was a little bit different. But you bring up something, Lester, real quick, that one last piece. Everybody wants to know why this 49ers team is injured so much. I wrote a piece for the Sports Illustrated when I was working there, or writing for that site prior to the 2021 season. And I pointed to the fact that Kyle Shanahan's off. When you watch Kyle Shanahan practice, I was never there for a Jim Harbaugh practice, but the Kyle Shanahan practices, there's some physicality to them, but there's never live tackling. They're extremely quick. We're talking about an hour and a half and you're off the field. That's about it. The Jim Harbaugh practices, from everything that I've heard, were tough, and they were hitting and they were thumping hard. And, he used to talk about, Harbaugh would talk about building up that callus, that contact callus that you have to build up, so that when you get into the games, your body's used to the pounding that it's going to take on Sunday. That doesn't happen anymore. To help with that, to one more step with that, I was driving home before this show. Brent Jones was being interviewed on the radio. They were talking about the injuries that the 49ers sustained. One of the things that he talked about was the lack of contact in practices. Not necessarily Kyle Shanahan's practices, but just because of the way that the league is now and the lack of practices they have. But you've got to be able to build up that contact callus. You've got to get your body ready to take those hits and get twisted in odd directions and all those kind of things. They don't do that. And I think that's partly why.
Do you think that is a primarily a Kyle Shanahan issue, or is that, to your point, is that a league-wide issue because of the fact that the collective bargaining agreement has taken away the ability to have those more physical practices?
I think there's a league-wide issue with it, but the 49ers are ahead of the league-wide issue. They're worse. I mean, there's injury issues everywhere,
right?
But the 49ers continue to lead the league in injuries on a regular basis. And I think that some of that is just because of the way that they practice. And I don't have there's no way to say yes for sure, but that's what I look at. And I'm looking at a guy who played in the NFL. I don't know how long Brent Jones was there, but he was pretty successful, kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I think Brent was in the league for somewhere around 9 years, something like that. I remember looking at his stats recently.
Yeah, something like that. I think he started in '87, and I know he was with the team. I think I know he was there in '94 when they won the Super Bowl.
Right. Most
Right.
definitely there in 94.
Yeah, and I think it was a couple years after that he retired. So yeah, I think it was around 9 or so. A heck of a tight end from Santa Clara University. No longer
Yes, sir.
a football team there for the Broncos, but
that's the sad reality for my University of the Pacific Tigers as well. I am unfortunately alumni brothers with Pete Carroll, and that's not something I'm proud of, but he was a quarterback for the UOP Tigers back in the day. UOP Tigers are no more. They canceled it the year before I got there, Jack. They ripped the rug right out from under me.
Yeah, they just yanked it right out, and you didn't even get to go to any games. See what you missed?
Terrible.
Yeah,
I just went to all the Niner games instead.
there you go. Well, that's it for. Well, look, we got real quick. Odd Job comes in. He says Olubakandi. That's right, the basketball player from UOP.
Yes, I was there with Michael Olukandi.
That's right. He helped them out I think they got to the NCAA tournament. They might have even won a game or two in there that year.
Yes, we did. We got to that second round.
And Ryan Anthony says 49ers beat the Chiefs 24-17, put up 175 yards rushing on them. We'll get to that. We're going to get to that, Ryan. Come back on Friday over to Rob's channel, though, because we do this twice a week. Monday here, Friday over there. So come check it out.
Yes, we will be excited for that show. We'll be on to the next game. We will be able to stop talking about this one.
That's right. So real quick, we're gonna shut this thing down for the night. But before we leave, if you could do a couple of favors, get over to Rob's channel. The information's below in the description. Pretty easy to find it. Just go to Rob Shu here on YouTube. Make sure that you are subscribed to his channel if you're not already, and follow his great content. And then Raphael 562 and member of the toolbox over here, one of my channel says like and subscribe, everyone. Please do that. And then last but not least, get yourselves over to 49ers.pressdemocrat.com, the Inside the 49ers blog over there. Rob, it's always fun talking to you, even if we're arguing a little bit today.
Always a pleasure, man. I like a good friendly disagreement.
That's right. Sometimes a little bit of disagreement furthers the conversation. So
yes, it
Rob,
does.
Enjoy the rest of your night in Hotlanta, and we'll be talking again on Friday.
Yes, we will, sir. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care, everybody. Talk to you all soon.